Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The date today is Wednesday, April 8th, and we are going to be watching this video that is going to cover your exam review for interdependence. This is the first exam that you will be given online. It will be, as of right now, it'll be Monday. As far as the format in which the exam is going to be given, that has yet to be determined. This exam review will also follow with a Kahoot tomorrow, and that's basically it. So, for this exam review, it says instructions. Below is a list of all information you will need to know for your first online assessment dated Monday, April 13th, 2020. Most of the information will be listed items, but all of the questions will come from the video that is linked to this assignment. You must watch the video to answer the questions. We will follow with a Google Meet Kahoot tomorrow. So tomorrow you will have a Google Meet Kahoot that will be live. So we'll be doing the Kahoot while we are on Google Meet. So basically the way this is going to work, I'm going to read through these things and I'm going to discuss what it is that you need to know. And there will be some questions at the bottom that you can fill in from this specific video. So for number one, this is the first thing you will need to know is the food chain in order from the bottom to the top, as well as different animals that occupy different food chains. So let's go ahead and start with that. You know that the food chain starts at the baseline with producers, followed by primary consumers, then secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, then quaternary consumers at the top. It says that so for the blanks that I have right there, so producer. So an example of a producer would be a palm tree. I think that serves as a primary example of a producer. A palm tree, it gets its energy from the sun. It is at the baseline level. An example of a primary consumer would be a caterpillar. Caterpillars are primary consumers as they will consume vegetation. An example of a secondary consumer would be a bird. Birds eat caterpillars as they are very nutritious for them, and that is just something that they like to eat. A good example of a tertiary consumer would be a cat, because a cat, although birds are very hard to catch, from time to time, cats do find their meals coming from birds. At least wild cats do, if they are very sneaky and they can get they can hunt them successfully. And a quaternary consumer in this instance would be a dog, because a dog, obviously we know dogs are stronger, bigger, and more superior to cats, household cats that is. So we are going to scroll down to number 2. It says you will need to be able to determine which food chain levels are associated with being a carnivore, omnivore, or herbivore, as well as what each term means. So, carnivore is an animal that eats meat. A herbivore is an animal that eats plants. And an omnivore is an animal that eats plants and meat. So, it says which levels of the food chain are carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores located, and which animals did I use? So for the carnivores are located at the level of secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and sometimes quaternary consumer. Herbivores are located at the level specifically of primary consumers. And omnivores are often associated with quaternary consumers. Now, an animal that is a carnivore, a good example of a carnivore would be a hyena. Hyenas are located in the African food chain, usually at the level of secondary consumer to tertiary. It depends, of course, on the environment. A great example of a herbivore would be a squirrel. Squirrels, they feed off of peanuts. They feed off of any types of seeds that come from plants, as that's what peanuts in all respect are. A good example of an omnivore would be a bear. A bear is a quaternary consumer. It is at the top of the food chain. It will eat trash. It will eat your leftover potato chips, or it will eat you. Whatever is available to it, it will consume. Number 3 says you will need to be able to define photosynthesis and determine which animals use photosynthesis in the food chain. Photosynthesis is the ability for an organism such as plants, okay, to be able to acquire energy from the sun. The leaves of plants act as solar panels, and those solar panels absorb the sun's energy and allows the plants to be able to use it, so they can do certain biological processes for their bodies. Now, it says, so what is the purpose of photosynthesis? The purpose of photosynthesis is for plants to be able to get energy from the sun to separate carbon dioxide into individual carbon and oxygen molecules to make glucose or sugar. So the purpose of photosynthesis is to take the sun's energy and turn carbon into sugar. Number 4 says you will need to be able to define decomposers and provide an example of decomposers. Okay. So decomposers and the purpose of decomposition. These are any type of organism that essentially feeds off of the remains of dead animals. They're not necessarily scavenging. Okay. They have a specific thing that they eat. They eat and they break down dead organic material. It could be the remains of a lion kill, or it could be plants that are on the ground. They don't discriminate. They feed off of the dead and decaying matter. But obviously, the flesh and meat from an animal that has recently been, killed for prey, okay, the remains of that animal is what we most often associate decomposers as feeding on. Now, examples of decomposers. The main example for decomposers that I want you to remember are flies and bacteria. That is the primary two that you will need to be able to remember. And then a third one is mushrooms. Those 3 are considered to be decomposers. A little side note that I want to tell you too. Decomposers are located, they are not directly on the food chain per se, okay? But they are often pictured as being just outside the food chain. So every animal and every organism in a food chain, if we were looking at, or food web rather, if we were looking at arrows pointing all around, every animal in plant and organism in a food chain would all have arrows pointing to decomposers, because decomposers break down anything that is dead and is decaying. Number 5 says you will need to be able to define a food chain and food web and determine the difference between the two. A food chain is just a hierarchy of animals that the animals are classified based on what they eat and how big and how powerful they are in terms of their size. A food web is basically all the animals that live in a specific environment and the multiple different food chains that exist in any given environment. Okay, and I gave you 2 diagrams. So the diagram to the left is just showing you a food chain going from producers all the way up to quaternary consumers. And on the right, you are seeing a food web, and you see the interconnectivity of the arrows and which animals eat which. Now, number 6 says you will need to familiarize yourself with the term apex predator in relation to humans. And then it says, what factors relate humans to being apex predators? So, the idea of humans are apex predators because we have a few things that animals don't. With the number 1 thing being our technology, which is directly associated with our large brains. If we go back to evolution, during our Australopithecine days, we did not have very large brains, and we were really not at the top of the food chain because we did not have the same ability to protect ourselves or hunt larger game. Today, like I told you before, there can be a lion charging at us, but we have weapons that can take down that lion long before he ever even came close. That is what makes us the dominant predator, that we are very, very smart. We don't need large size or large strength, okay, because we're quite weak in comparison to other animals. We're very weak, but we don't need any of that because we are very, very intelligent and we have technology. Number 7 says you will need to be able to identify how animals in a food chain are dependent upon each other. And then it says, what is the interconnectivity of animals in a food chain? And this is a concept that we're going to be getting more in depth upon in the future. But the idea here is that from the top to the bottom, every animal is really dependent upon itself to create a system, to create the flowing hierarchy. For example, if you eradicate all of the plants in a specific environment, the primary consumers are going to die out. If the primary consumers die out, okay, then the secondary consumers are not going to be able to eat anything, and then they're going to die out. If they go, the tertiary consumers that eat the secondary and primary consumers are not going to have anything to eat, and then they'll die out, and then the apex predator, of course, will likely die out next. So the idea is that everything is heavily interconnected upon each other, okay? And you need to understand that basic concept for now. So that is basically the main point of this exam. It will probably be 20 to 25 questions, a usual exam that I give. You need to know everything as I've described it. If you've been doing the activities, you've been watching the videos, you've been doing the slides, reading through the slides, doing the worksheets, this will be an A, an easy A. Everything that I've gone over it in depth with you. I've reviewed with you. We're going to do a Kahoot tomorrow. It'll now be up to you to be able to do your job so that you can be successful. And that is it for now. Thank you, and I will see you later. Alligator.